You're looking at a head of state in custody, Nicolás Maduro, president of Venezuela, taken by the United States after a lightning military strike on Caracas. Warships were moved into the Caribbean. Key military sites in the capital were hit, and the White House revived the 2-century-old Monroe Doctrine, stating that it views leadership in its hemisphere as a matter of US interest. The US calls it law enforcement, Venezuela calls it a coup. And the stakes are bigger than ever. In the wake of Maduro's capture, the Trump administration announced Venezuela's interim government will be transferring 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the US. Crude worth $2 billion set to flow straight to American docks. The ripple effect is global. The US have now seized the oil tanker Marinera, a sanctioned vessel that had evaded a US blockade and reflagged under Russia's banner. It comes as Russia reportedly sent warships and a submarine to escort the sanctioned tanker. US aircraft and helicopters were observed over the vessel as US forces moved in to seize it.
Another sanctioned tanker, M. Sophia, was also intercepted by US Coast Guard and Special Operation Forces.
Maduro's capture is a move that has set off a chain of events stretching from Caracas to the North Atlantic. These images trace the story of how Washington captured a sitting president, the reasons it gave for acting, and why critics warn it could reshape politics across Latin America and even challenge global norms of power. This is photo evidence. This is Nicolás Maduro on January the 5th, 2026, seen in handcuffs, stepping off a helicopter onto a Manhattan helipad. He's flanked by heavily armed federal agents as they escort him into an armored car, bound for a federal courthouse. The US government says Maduro, Venezuela's president for more than a decade, is now in American custody.
The United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela, and it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
It's the first time in more than 20 years the US has seized a foreign leader by force, the last instance being the 2003 invasion of Iraq that toppled Saddam Hussein. Washington accuses him of narco-terrorism, of running what it calls a state-backed drug trafficking network known as the Cartel of the Suns. The charges have been on the books since 2020, alleging that Maduro and other top officials profited, directly or indirectly, from the smuggling of tons of cocaine to the United States and beyond. Prosecutors say Maduro and his inner circle used their positions to facilitate shipments and shield an international network of drug smugglers. Maduro has pleaded not guilty. Caracas calls the charges baseless and the operation an illegal coup. The operation, called Absolute Resolve, began just after 2 a.m. in Caracas, Venezuela's capital, with explosions reported across the city. Satellite images show before and after Venezuela's largest military complex, Fort Tiuna, was struck. The US says it temporarily cut power to the capital to disable air defenses and communications, clearing a path for military helicopters to reach the presidential compound. Photos show massive fires blazing for miles. The aim, according to US officials, was to neutralize air defenses and secure the president without putting ground troops at risk. They were taken first to the USS Iwo Jima, a warship in the Caribbean, where Maduro was held in the ship's brig, a reinforced, isolated facility designed for detainees and prisoners of war. Strategically, this allowed the US to avoid the legal complexities of landing him in another country, treating the vessel as sovereign American soil in international waters. From there, Maduro was taken to the US Navy base at Guantanamo Bay and later transferred to Manhattan, where he remains in custody. According to US officials, the capture of Maduro was the result of a tightly coordinated military operation involving air, sea, and special forces, planned over months, but executed in just hours. 2 major US naval formations were positioned off Venezuela's coast, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group and the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group. Together, they gave Washington control of the surrounding airspace and sea lanes, while intelligence assets tracked the movements of one target. US officials say they waited for a narrow window, a moment when Maduro was stationary and inside a secure compound. The US Navy tightened its presence along Venezuela's coastline. F-35 stealth fighter jets were deployed in the operation to deal with layered air defenses, including advanced Russian S-300 missile systems and Chinese-supplied radar networks. Jets hit key military targets, including Fort Tiuna and La Carlota Air Base. Communications and air defense systems were also targeted to limit Venezuela's ability to respond. Shortly after, helicopters were seen in the night sky. According to Washington, the assault team breached the compound, identified their target, and detained Maduro and his wife without prolonged resistance. From insertion to extraction, the US says the entire operation lasted just over 2 hours. But why did the US move against Maduro in the first place? To make sense of Maduro's capture, we first examine the series of events and pressures that brought the US to act. The White House says this operation was about stopping drugs, specifically cocaine and fentanyl, from reaching the US. For months, the Trump administration has carried out maritime strikes on alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean and Pacific. These operations have resulted in over 100 deaths across 35 incidents. But the evidence complicates this claim. Official US government data shows that in 2024, Mexico was the primary source of illicit fentanyl, and most cocaine reaches the US via Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia through the Pacific, not Venezuela. At the same time, Venezuela holds some of the world's largest oil reserves, a resource it nationalized in the 1970s after taking control of fields previously run by American companies. Despite US sanctions aimed at pressuring Maduro, who many deem illegitimate, Caracas kept exporting crude to China on the black market. Trump publicly accused Venezuela of using its oil to finance narco-terrorism and announced that the US naval presence in the Caribbean will only get bigger. The US has seized Venezuelan oil tankers heading to or from the country, claiming they were transporting sanctioned crude. In December 2025, US authorities intercepted the Skipper, a very large crude carrier believed to be carrying around 1.1 million barrels of oil, which was headed for China. Caracas called the seizures illegal acts of piracy, but Washington called it law enforcement. But oil is only part of the story. Nicolás Maduro is a self-proclaimed Marxist who styles himself as a worker president in the image of Hugo Chavez, the charismatic leftist leader who ruled Venezuela for 14 years and personally selected Maduro as his successor before dying in 2013. Under Chavez and later Maduro, Venezuela became a patron of the Latin American left, using subsidized oil to support Fidel Castro's Cuba and inspiring other leftist leaders across the region. For Washington, Maduro was more than a criminal suspect. He inherited a political project that challenged US power, aligned with China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba, and defined American influence in the hemisphere. Trump's administration even discussed offering up to $50 million to anyone who could capture or remove the Venezuelan leader. Trump has invoked the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, asserting America's right to dominate the Western Hemisphere as rival powers expand their influence. From Venezuela's perspective, the motive is clear: control the country's oil and assert US dominance. And for the rest of the world, the concern is broader still. Venezuela now faces a precarious future.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
Despite claims from Washington that the US would run the country, pro-government militias are still dominant across the capital. Opposition figures argue this could be a chance for change, but history suggests that governments under siege often consolidate power rather than relinquish it. With an interim leadership now in place under Delcy Rodriguez and Maduro's allies warning of resistance, the streets remain tense and unpredictable. But any developments will be felt strongly in Colombia, which shares a long land border with its neighbor and holds elections in 2026. President Gustavo Petro has already sent troops to the frontier, preparing for a potential massive refugee influx and heightened instability. Tensions between Bogota and Washington have sharply escalated. On board Air Force One, Trump said Colombia is run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, a reference to Petro that drew immediate rebukes from Colombian leaders. Petro, who was elected on a left-wing platform, rejects the accusation and has warned that further threats could unleash the Jaguar, a phrase he uses to signal national resistance. Elsewhere in the region, Cuba could also feel the impact. Long allied with Venezuela, Havana now risks a collapse in oil supply once provided via Caracas. The Trump administration signals that military intervention may not be necessary because the regime could fall on its own. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, has warned that Cuba is in a lot of trouble, signaling concern over what could happen as Venezuelan support dries up. In Panama, where Trump has previously threatened military action over control of the canal, anxiety is high, fueled by memories of the 1989 US invasion and the arrest of Manuel Noriega. And beyond Latin America, critics see a pattern. Trump has revived talk of seizing Greenland, a strategic Arctic territory, raising alarm among NATO allies about US intentions and the future of global alliances. The United States already operates a major military installation on the island, Bidevik Space Base, a key hub for missile warning and space surveillance. Greenland occupies a strategic position in the North Atlantic, offering access to the increasingly contested Arctic region. As polar ice continues to melt, new shipping routes and untapped resources are expected to open, raising the stakes of control in the far north. Meanwhile, Iran condemned the operation, calling it an illegal act against a sovereign state. In Tehran, where mass protests continue, President Trump warned that Iranian authorities would be hit very hard if security forces killed more demonstrators. US Senator Lindsey Graham shared a photo of President Trump holding a signed Make Iran Great Again hat aboard Air Force One, highlighting concerns about potential renewed conflict with Tehran. The sight of a powerful country launching a surprise raid to topple a smaller neighbor has sent ripples as far as China. Commentators immediately drew comparisons to how an assault on Taiwan could play out, even as Beijing officially condemned the operation as illegal and a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty. For now, the streets of Caracas remain tense. The Maduro Chavismo movement holds the loyalty of the security forces, and the colectivos patrol the neighborhoods. While opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, presses her claim for democratic change. The US has forcibly removed a sitting president, reasserting its influence in the Western Hemisphere, as rivals and allies alike must reckon with the fallout.